Welcome to another edition of Armchair Explorations. I'm T.H. Baughman. I'm a lecturer in history for Zegrahm, and I do Antarctic, Arctic, and Europe. And today, I thought, they asked me, could I give some suggestions? You know, we're all housebound. What can you read that'll get you ready and excited about going to Antarctica? So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about a whole bunch of books, but there's a bibliography on my website, and they'll have it on the Zegrahm one too. So let's go. First book, and most essential one, in my opinion. If you're only going to read one, this is the one. It's Let Heroes Speak by Michael Rosoff, and he has covered all of the expeditions from Cook through the death of Shackleton. It's brilliantly done. No historian, no professional historian would attempt this, but he's not. He's a medical doctor. He's on the faculty at UCLA Medical School, and he's brilliant, and he could pull it off. And certainly, I know I couldn't have. I read this every year before I go south. And as I said, 22 seasons I've been able to go down, and it's still a great book. Next one, Jeff Rubin wrote this. This is the Antarctica volume in the Lonely Planets. This is really good. He's put a lot more really good stuff into it than some of the other guides that you can look at. But this is a good one. And you notice I've got it duct tape because it gets a lot of wear and tear. Now the third book here, this is a book that's probably read by more people who've gone south than any other book, but I don't like it for a couple of reasons. One, it's too close to Worsley's account, and it only covers the Endurance. One of the things I always try to make clear when I'm on a cruise in Antarctica, yes, the Endurance got you interested in polar history, but there's so much more to Shackleton if you know his whole story. And that's why, for example, I would urge you to think, if you're really serious, as I think it was George II, King of England, who when handed a book about this size, he said, scribble, scribble, scribble. Eh, Mr. Gibbon? It is scribble, scribble, but it's first-rate scribbling. Roland Huntford is one of the, along with Rosoff, are the two, I think, preeminent polar historians. He has a flaw to him, and I'll come back to that. Now, if you don't want to read 750 book pages, my biography you can read, and I wrote it with a specific idea. You could read it on a flight from Chicago to New York. And what its advantage of it is, if you don't want to read 500 pages, you get the whole story in brief, but it does set the whole thing in context. If you don't understand 1907 to 1909 about Shackleton, I think you've missed the greatness of the man. So, and instead, if you wanted something, read his book, Heart of the Antarctic. When he got back from the 1907 to 1909 expedition, his publisher was no fool. He knew a man like Shackleton, man of action. He's not going to sit down for a year and write a book. So what he did was he sent a guy out to meet him. And when he got back to New Zealand and got on the boat to England, this guy was with him. And every day, Shackleton talked for an hour or so. Guy would clean it up, type it up, they'd fill it. And by the time they got to England, it was done. It was out in a few weeks and a huge seller. And it's got an intimacy that any of these other books have. And if you realize how good this book is, then you'll want to read this one, Shackleton's account of the Imperial Antarctic expedition, 1914-17. This is actually, in some respects, a better book, but this is the one most people will want to read. Okay, now, when Shackleton died, one of his close friends, H.R. Mill, who was a part of the RGS, Royal Geographic Society, corresponded with his widow, Shackleton's widow, the Lady Shackleton. And out of that came this correspondence, which Rosoff put before all of us. I mean, you could go to England and read some of them if you had some credible introduction. But now you can read, and there's a lot of things in this that we find out that we already knew now, but we found out when we first knew about it. And I think that's a factor that makes it nice. Okay, now keep going. Huntford again. He is brilliant. He can be trusted on Amundsen. The other part, the Scott part, sadly not. He has I think prejudice against the British Empire is not too strong a word, but you can read the Amundsen part, and I think it's really well done, but be a little cautious when you read the British part, Scott. Now, if you want an antidote for that, my book, Pilgrims on the Ice, covers Scott's first expedition, and it gives you, I think, a more sympathetic, and I'd like to think you get a better view of what he was really like and why the men who sailed with him sailed again. And just one part of that Scott story is revealed after 50 or 60 years of wondering about it by a wonderful scientist, Susan Solomon, who is a widely decorated scientist. But she wrote this to explain what really did happen on the last days of Scott's life. And it's essential if you're a Scott person. Now, this one I put in not just for sentimental reasons, but because I think it's still a good place to start other than Rozoff. This is The Worst Journey in the World by Absolute Charter Garage. When I got an offer to go to Antarctica in 1973, I started looking for books, and this was the first book I read about Antarctica at all. And I think it's still a good start. It gives you a sympathetic view of Scott, and which many people will refine a bit. But this is a wonderful book, and it talks about one of the greatest journeys in all of polar history, the winter journey. Zipping right along. Rozoff has a bibliography here of freestanding things. This is a book that only 1% of you will want to have this book, but you would, the 1% to read it, will be, or it should be 25%. You'll be thrilled. I wrote the review for this for the Polar Record, which is one of the premier things. And in my review, I said, first of all, you won't believe you bought this book. Then you won't believe you started to read this book. And then you will not believe you can't put it down, because on almost every page, there's something. If you have pretty good knowledge of Antarctic history, you'll find something almost every page you didn't know. All right, and for the last one, we have a coffee table book. There's dozens of them. I like this one because I think the balance between content and coverage of everything from seals to penguins and history, and good maps and lots of nice pictures and that sort of thing. So it's McGonagall, and it's Antarctica, the Blue Continent. So I have rushed through as many as I could get to in this period. But I want to take a second here before I'll let you go. A couple of months ago, Zegrahm asked us all, what's your favorite book? Well, I had a little trouble with that, but I didn't, you would think I would have. I did not. Here it is, Eothen, E-O-T-H-E-N, by Alexander William Kinglake. I'm going to tell you a story, but I've told on the ships many times, and especially when we're in the Black Sea or anywhere you get near to the Ottoman Empire. This is an account of his work in 1830s. Okay, let me tell you the story. Now, the story I'm going to tell you didn't happen to me, obviously, but I'm going to tell it in the first person because it makes the most sense that way. It's clearly not me because the story is set in 1946. And the person was a reporter who worked for the Beaverbrook newspaper chain, Beaverbrook and Churchill. We're very close. You might have run his name at that. And so I read this article, and this is the story. I was working for the Beaverbrook newspapers right after World War II. And I didn't really do diplomatic stuff, but one time I got sent to a conference, and I got a little out of place, but I walked into the lobby of the main hotel one day, and I couldn't believe it. Churchill was sitting on a couch. No one was talking to him. So I thought, I'm not missing this. I rushed up and very quietly said, "Excuse me, Mr. Churchill, I so admire your writing." Churchill wrote more than most of the 19th century novelists. He painted more paintings than any, I think, of the Impressionists. But anyhow, I went to him and I said, "I so admire your writing. Could you give me something to read that would improve my writing?" He looked at me and he said, "Kinglake." "Kinglake," I said. "Kinglake." And at that moment, somebody came, grabbed him, took him away. So we went back to London, went to Charing Cross, where all the bookstores are, and I found that Kinglake had only written 2 books. One, an account of his travels in the Middle East in the 1830s. And the other was a 6-volume account of the Crimean War. You can replay the war quicker than you can read. Okay. So I bought Eothen. And I couldn't believe it. On every page, it's just the most beautifully written thing I've ever read. It's just incredible. I became fanatic. Let's say, I think fanatic would be too much, but not, my friends probably wouldn't think that. Anyhow, I just couldn't stop telling people, have you read Eothen? And I'd stop people on the street and say, "Have you read this? Or you're reading on the bus." And one time I ran into a friend from university and I said, "I'll bet you £5," which in 46 was a lot of money. "I bet you £5 that you can't open this book to any page." Now, by that time I was reading the 6-volume history of the Crimean War. I said, "Here, look." And then he opened the book on volume 1, and he was reading the sources where Kinglake was just listening and talking about his sources. And I thought, "Oh God, I'm going to be shot. I'm down." And he closes the book and he says, "I owe you £5." Well, I noticed I was getting a little fanatical because people would come, when I came into the room, some of them would find an excuse to leave. And but I just couldn't stop telling about Kinglake. And one night we just put the paper to bed, and there were younger guys sitting there, and they hadn't heard me talk, so they were still there. And I was talking about how wonderful Kinglake was. And have you ever been talking to an audience and suddenly you realize they're looking behind you, like there's somebody behind you? And I had that feeling, and I turned, and it was Beaverbrook, Churchill's longtime friend and confidant, and I thought, oh, and my boss. And I thought, I'm cooked here. But instead, Beaverbrook said, "Isn't that just like Winnie? He acts like he invented Kinglake." But I was at the dinner party where somebody introduced Churchill to Kinglake. And you know who it was? Rudyard Kipling. Well, I hope and I look forward towards meeting you on the quayside as we're going up the way to the boat and off for an adventure, either in the polar regions or Europe or anywhere else you want to go that Zegrahm can take you.